invitant sur scène Miguel Alava, directeur Amazon Web Services.
Bonjour Paris, vous allez bien? Bonjour à tous. Bonjour et bienvenue à cet événement, cette nouvelle édition de la AWS Summit Paris 2018. Cet événement qui s'est fait pour vous, c'était fait pour répondre à les questions que vous pouvez avoir. Donc, nous sommes ravis de vous accueillir aujourd'hui ici. Chacun a son rôle à jouer dans la transformation digitale de son entreprise. Et vous êtes d'accord de son succès. Vous êtes les créateurs de demain, les bâtisseurs d'aujourd'hui. Si vous êtes là aujourd'hui, c'est pour prendre la responsabilité dans cette transformation digitale. Nous sommes ici plus de 4000 personnes, avec une agenda qui comporte plus de 50 sessions, avec des sponsors qui vous pouvez rencontrer dans les halls principales. Et aussi, nous avons aujourd'hui un live streaming. J'aimerais bien prendre un petit instant pour saluer à tous ceux qui nous regardent maintenant. Bonjour, merci d'être là et bienvenue encore. C'est une journée assez rythmée. Nous commençons aujourd'hui avec la keynote, avec 4 clients français qui vont témoigner de leur utilisation dans la plateforme d'Amazon Web Services. Nous comptons avec SNCF, Renault, Container Square et Euronext. Nous continuerons après avec des sessions dédiées, techniques et business. Et nous finirons la journée avec une présentation assez intéressante. Ce sera Boris Lecker et Stéphane Hadinger qui vont nous parler de l'importance des talents digitaux dans cette transformation. Cette session sera animée aussi par les dessins de François Cointe, assez intéressant à mon avis. Et on va finir la journée avec un cocktail qui va vous permettre de connecter avec vos pairs, avec des équipes d'Amazon Web Services et aussi avec des partenaires. Donc, je vous le disais, des thématiques diverses, des thématiques variées, avec des IoT, des sécurités, des conduits de changement, des serverless. Je suis sûr que peu importe en fait les parcours, les fonctions que vous avez trouvé les bonnes sessions qui vont répondre à vos questions. Alors, si nous sommes là aujourd'hui, si cette journée c'est possible et ce contenu est disponible, c'est grâce aux sponsors que nous avons, notamment les sponsors globaux, VMware et Intel, qui nous accompagnent sur les 35 sessions Summit que nous avons autour du monde. Mais aussi, on rend merci à nos partenaires locaux qui sont là auprès de nos clients français tout au long de l'année. Ils sont nombreux aujourd'hui. Je vous anime encore une fois à les rencontrer, les poser vos questions. Je suis sûr qu'ils ont l'expérience et de bons conseils à vous donner. Et je suis sûr aussi qu'ils méritent vos applaudissements aujourd'hui. Merci pour faire cette journée possible. Alors, nous avons nombreuses activités tout au long de la journée. Nous avons les stands d'Amazon Web Services, les booths, où vous allez rencontrer des experts d'Amazon Web Services. Nous avons aussi un espace dédié aux startups innovantes. Et une nouvelle activité, en fait, une boîte à questions. Ça s'appelle « Raconte-moi ton cloud ». Et ça vous permettra en fait de raconter vos anecdotes autour des clouds. J'ai hâte de voir les résultats que nous allons avoir. Et maintenant, c'est le moment pour moi de partager quelques informations autour des Amazon Web Services. Nous sommes aujourd'hui une société de 22 milliards de dollars de run rate business avec une croissance de 49% année après année. Et c'est une croissance qui s'accélère. C'est une croissance qui marque l'adoption des Amazon Web Services partout dans le monde. Nous avons aujourd'hui des millions de clients, encore une fois, partout dans le monde. Les entreprises à qui nous parlons aujourd'hui, ils sont de ces stratégies de migration massive, ils sont de ces stratégies de cloud first, ils sont de ces stratégies de fermeture des data centers. Ils ne se posent plus la question de comment est-ce qu'il est fait, est-ce que le cloud c'est le bon choix, mais c'est plutôt comment est-ce qu'ils y peuvent aller rapidement. Et c'est partout dans le monde, mais aussi en France. Amazon Web Services aime la France et nous avons des dizaines de milliers de clients en France. Des startups innovantes, comme je l'ai dit, TITS, Content Square, PayPlac, des entreprises qui utilisent les clouds pour innover. C'est le cas de Smatis, Les Bons Coins, Vente Privée, Decathlon, mais aussi des acteurs majeurs de l'économie française, dont 80% des sociétés de CAC 40, comme Schneider Electric, Veolia, Lafarge Holcim et Engie, entre autres. Mais aussi des organisations publiques qui accompagnent les citoyens tous les jours dans son vie et utilisent aussi Amazon Web Services comme la SNCF ou Radio France. Et c'est cette adoption, c'est cette demande qui nous a poussé à ouvrir la région en France, la région ici à Paris, composée de 3 zones de disponibilité. La région était ouverte l'année précédente, le mois de décembre, le 19 décembre. Et il s'agit à des investissements déjà faits, déjà réalisés, qui étaient demandés par nos clients. Une autre demande fréquente que nous avons reçue de nos clients, c'était la possibilité d'avoir passé un contrat à Amazon Web Services de manière locale. Et nous avons le plaisir de vous informer que ça sera possible à partir du 1er juillet 2018 avec le lancement d'une entité Amazon Web Services Europe. Alors, je reviens sur la région. Et en France, vous le savez bien, il y a un écosystème innovant des startups, un écosystème très dynamique maintenant, avec une communauté aussi solide de chercheurs, des infrastructures à niveau de transport, à niveau d'énergie, à niveau de télécommunications, des marques de luxe parmi les plus importantes du monde. Et les clouds, en fait, donnent à ces entreprises une manière d'innover, une manière de chercher l'agilité et d'innover rapidement. C'est ça qui explique que dizaines de milliers de clients français utilisent les clouds maintenant, utilisent la région d'Amazon Web Services partout dans le monde, mais aussi la région française. Ils s'appuient sur la région française depuis l'année précédente. Des sociétés comme Veolia, SNCF, Schibsted, Thales, entre autres, utilisent la région en France. Et utilisent la région en France, en fait, pour des raisons différentes. Ils utilisent la région en France pour des raisons de disponibilité, de conformité, de latence, en tout, en fait, pour cesser l'excellence opérationnelle. Si vous souhaitez vous en savoir plus de comment vous pouvez migrer vos applications vers les clouds, et pas seulement vers les clouds, mais vers la région de Paris, je vous invite à visiter les stands AWS où vous pouvez rencontrer des experts qui vont vous donner des conseils de comment est-ce que vous pouvez faire ça de manière plus efficace. Alors, il me reste plus que vous souhaiter un super événement, une super journée. Et on a beaucoup parlé, en fait, je vous laisse avec des questions et peut-être une réponse. On a beaucoup parlé des bâtisseurs, on a beaucoup parlé des créateurs, on a beaucoup parlé des entrepreneurs. Mais qui sont-ils et qui font-ils sur les clouds d'Amazon Web Services? Eh bien, pour vous en parler, et parler des tendances et partager des réalisations sur Amazon Web Services, je vais maintenant vous demander d'accueillir chaleureusement Dr. Werner Vogels, CTO d'Amazon.com. Merci à tous.
Bonjour, Paris. Don't worry, I won't embarrass myself by doing this in France. Yeah? Thank you all for being here this morning. Although I don't really know what Miguel said, I kind of guess that he talked to you about that this is an educational day. Yeah, the idea is that you get an opportunity to look at some of the new things that we've built at AWS, but also get to hear from the most important people, and that is your peers. In many of the breakout sessions, you'll find that other customers who have been using AWS for a while already will talk to you about their experiences, about how they've been building on AWS. And I think that's the most important value that you can get out of this day, really hearing how other people have been using AWS. And not only what the good things are, but also what the pitfalls are. Because, of course, we're not perfect. Although we strive for that, of course, mostly by listening to you and taking your feedback and building new services that help you succeed. When we started building AWS, we really had a particular type of customer in mind, namely those who are building, real builders, those who build applications. Not necessarily those who talk about it, but really those who want to invent and build applications on top of a new platform. And when I think about builders, I don't just think about developers. I mean, there's many more people involved in application development. And when I think about builders, I mean, the easiest thing about builders is to think about building a house. And in the past, I think what happened is that most IT platform providers would give you a prefabricated condo. You could actually move the walls a bit, you could put different paint on it, but in essence, they decided how your house was going to look like. Now, that may work for you, but I think in the modern world, we all want to decide ourselves how we're building our houses and how our houses are going to look like. So when we thought about that, we did not want to give you a prefabricated house on AWS. We wanted to give you the tools and the building blocks such that you can build your own house. And why? Because I felt that with the rise of cloud, we were going to build applications radically different from the way that we were doing it in the past. If you look how past platform developers, platform providers were building things, they basically were telling you how you should develop your software. I think that's pretty arrogant. Because I think the only one that really knows how to build your applications in the way that you want to is you. So we need to make sure that you have the right tools, that you can pick things out of the toolbox so that you can be successful. And that has always been sort of the driver behind AWS, making sure that we build features and services that help you be successful in the way that you want to be successful, not the way that we're telling you. And I know that many companies will tell you that they're customer-centric, but so often in the past with platform developers and builders, I've heard that, yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, you're right, I hear you. But we know better, because we're the experts. At AWS, 95% of the features and services that we delivered are delivered by direct feedback from our customers, by your requests. So of the well over 1,400 main features and services last year, almost all of them were because you were telling us, this is how we like to develop our systems. So with these 125, we really give you a really nice set of building blocks. And if I look at how development has changed over time, you can realize why we're giving you building blocks instead of these big sort of environments where we tell you what to do. If you've grown on three-tier architectures like I did, then these pictures are very familiar for you. And indeed, maybe in the mid-90s, this was the right model to have. Online applications were still in flux, how to develop them. You would start off with the web tier, and you have an application tier, and you'll have your database. But over time, each of these building blocks became huge. The web server was no longer a web server, it was an application router. I mean, if you're like me, you've either used Apache or Nginx as an application load balancer instead of just a web browser or a web server. And the same went for the application servers in the backend. So much functionality got thrown in there that these things became enormous. And to be able to scale them was a real nightmare. And so when we're looking at this and we're building our services in AWS, really thinking about what are the smallest building blocks that we can give you so that you can switch things in and out in the way that you want them to. And also making sure that it's not just AWS services that you can use here, but that you can actually bring in things from partners as well, or open source. If you want to run MQ series on AWS, of course you can. And making sure that you have all the building blocks that integrate well together. Modern development, however, looks very different. You really decomposed all of these big building blocks into very smaller pieces. Now, if you look at an architecture like from iRobot, these are the guys that build the Roombas, these robots that go through your house and clean your floors. They're all internet-enabled these days. And as you can see in this architecture slide, there's no servers here. It's all having different building blocks and connecting them together with serverless compute services like Lambda. And every piece of the whole robot architecture, all the different sort of functionality, is basically having serverless technology connecting the different building blocks together. And they're a perfect example of customers who are building what I would call 21st century architectures, really the modern way of development, by using all the different tools that we give them. And so if you think about not only how these architectures look like, we also need to give you support for doing development, of course, the development process itself. And there's so many different steps in that whole process, where you'll see not only sort of all sorts of influences on the different pieces that are evolving, especially if you do continuous integration and continuous deployment, you also need to have support for each of these different pieces as cycles, because we iterate continuously in this whole development cycle. There is no great development platform that doesn't come with a great IDE. And I think with AWS Cloud9, which we launched at re:Invent in November, it's clear that we're giving you an IDE that is perfectly suited for development in the cloud. So Cloud9 itself is an IDE that sits in the cloud, and just like every other IDE, supports all the languages, has all the sort of prefabricated plugins and things like that. But most importantly, you can actually develop Lambda functions in Cloud9 and debug and test them in the IDE. That's the only IDE that allows you to do this. It also has a whole set of other features around collaborative development. For example, if you want to do pair programming, but you're not in the same room together, Cloud9 is an ideal IDE to get this done. It sits on top of the CodeStar services. If you really want to build your own pipeline underneath Cloud9, we give you all the different building blocks to do this. The pipeline, code deploy, code commit, code build, all these different tools are things that allow you to build the pipelines that you exactly want to build for yourself. Of course, in all of this is without giving you support for operations as well. Because building things is one thing, but building it to be operated is a whole different story. Again, we give you a whole set of different tools and mechanisms to actually manage the systems that you have. I want to call out one of these, AWS X-Ray. If you haven't looked at that one, I think one of the hardest things we have in distributed systems is to be able to debug, to track and debug the different components that we have, especially if the only observation that you have, for example, is that your customers are getting 500s on the front end, and then you need to be able to track that back, where those errors come from, for which of the different components. So X-Ray allows you to instrument each and every one of these components, whether they're containers, whether they're VMs, whether they're serverless, or any of the databases, and then track performance and errors throughout the whole distributed system that you have through a visual interface. With all of these together, of course, we now have a large collection of services, 125 ones. And it's not the case anymore that AWS is infrastructure as a service. Compute storage databases was maybe something that we were in 2009, but that's no longer the case. Whether you want to do machine learning, whether you want to do deep learning, whether you want to do big data analytics, whether you want to do traditional data warehousing, whether you want to do IoT or mobile development, all of these different services are available on AWS. Because we've been listening to you how you want to develop your services, how you want to develop your applications. And for that, we need to give you choice. And we continue to run ahead of this. If you look at some of the other players in the market, you'll see that AWS has a significant advantage in terms of the different tools and mechanisms that we give to you. Even if you look at that database company that claims to have a cloud as well, we have 3 times as many databases as that they have. And it's interesting to see how our customers have been building on top of AWS, using all of these services. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you Rafael Villar, the CTO of SNCF, France National State-Owned Railway Company, here to talk to you about their mobile app on AWS.
Bonjour à tous. Au vu du remplissage de la salle, je pense que les transports publics ont bien fonctionné ce matin. Merci. 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 Alors, j'ai 7 minutes pour vous parler de la collaboration entre deux entreprises extrêmement innovantes dans le numérique, AWS évidemment, et la SNCF. Alors, l'histoire de la SNCF dans le numérique commence il y a longtemps et vous allez voir qu'on a un business qui a été et qui va être complètement transformé par les technologies du numérique. Comme vous le voyez, en 2000, sortie de Amazon et Google en France, et on sort voyagesncf.com, site de e-commerce, qui a été longtemps le premier site de e-commerce en Europe. Sortie de Facebook en France, on sort IDTGV, une marque complètement sur le web. Sortie de l'iPhone en 2007, et on sort en 2009 l'application V-Point, donc l'application mobile Voyage SNCF. Et puis, je vais y revenir, en 2015, on sort notre assistant de mobilité, l'application unifiée SNCF, sur le cloud AWS. 2015, c'est aussi un énorme changement pour nous, puisqu'en fait, la transformation numérique qu'on faisait au service de nos clients, on l'amène aussi en interne et dans d'autres domaines d'activité, notamment la maintenance prédictive avec l'IoT et le Big Data. On lance un programme digital pour tous, où on équipe l'ensemble de nos agents en terminaux mobiles. Et puis, on décide l'an dernier, enfin il y a 1 an et demi, de mener une transformation majeure de nos systèmes d'information qui sont relativement complexes, avec une migration globale vers le cloud public à hauteur de 60% de notre parc applicatif. Alors, il ne vous a pas échappé que la SNCF est une entreprise relativement complexe. Elle est complexe parce que notre activité est complexe. On transporte 14 millions de passagers par jour. On a 30 000 km de voies et on en rénove 1000 km par an. C'est des chantiers qui sont titanesques quand vous imaginez que les trains arrêtent de circuler à peu près vers minuit et qu'ils recommencent à 5 heures. On a 15 000 trains et 25 000 bus qui circulent par jour et on opère 3 000 gares. À la hauteur de cette complexité, évidemment, notre patrimoine informatique et numérique est complexe. 130 000 PC, 90 000 agents équipés de terminaux mobiles, mais surtout 170 000 agents connectés avec nos partenaires tous les jours. On possède 2 data centers en propre, dont on possède les mètres carrés à Lyon et à Lille. Et on a 1425 applications qui font tourner l'ensemble des processus du groupe. Alors, on a un enjeu autour de ça, c'est que toute cette complexité, il faut qu'on la masque pour nos clients, pour rendre leurs déplacements les plus simples possibles. À ce titre, on a donc lancé l'application SNCF. Alors, l'application SNCF, c'est quoi? C'est une application qui vise à agréger des données internes, des données externes, qui vise aussi à être connectée en temps réel avec l'exploitation des trains, pour donner l'information voyageur la plus fiable possible à nos clients. C'est une application qui est utilisée massivement, 10 millions de téléchargements en 3 ans, avec des pics de connectivité aux alentours de 40 millions de connexions par mois. Donc évidemment, c'est une application qui est très éligible au cloud, bien que très critique. Alors pourquoi est-ce qu'elle est critique? Parce que, évidemment, même si elle est utilisée au jour le jour par, je pense, la plupart d'entre vous, ce qui est très important pour nous, c'est qu'elle résiste en cas de crise. Et c'est évidemment là où on a les pics de charge, puisqu'en fait, nos clients cherchent des itinéraires alternatifs et cherchent à savoir ce qui se passe sur le réseau ferré. Et d'ailleurs, à ce titre, on a eu quand même un début d'année relativement sportif, puisqu'on a commencé par l'épisode neigeux, après on a eu les grèves, et puis la semaine dernière, on a eu un blackout à Saint-Lazare. Et à chaque fois, en fait, on a tiré bénéfice du cloud pour absorber la charge. Et donc, on a une application qui est capable, je vous ai mis quelques chiffres, on passe de 170 à 240 instances d'application en seulement 20 minutes. Évidemment, le chemin inverse est vrai aussi, dans un objectif de contrôle des coûts. En plus de la scalabilité, ce qu'on va aller chercher dans le cloud, c'est la résilience. Alors, nul n'est parfait. Je vous l'ai dit, il y a 15 microservices c'est une application qui est vraiment complexe. Hein. Réellement, quand il faut connecter de l'exploitation de train, etc., ça ne se fait pas simplement. Et on a fait une montée de version en début d'année qui ne s'est pas très bien passée, un appel applicatif qui a été mal calculé, et on a multiplié par 60 le nombre d'appels à chaque connexion. Donc évidemment, la production s'est écroulée. On a déclenché les plans de reprise d'activité, et on a été capable de réparer la production en 45 minutes sur le cloud, ce qu'on n'aurait bien sûr jamais été capable de faire avec des technologies qu'on aurait opérées en interne. Alors évidemment, quand vous avez une application qui se comporte de la sorte, vous aimeriez bien que tout votre système d'information se comporte pareil. Ça nous retirerait quand même quelques épines du pied. Et on a donc décidé d'accélérer notre partenariat avec Amazon. Et c'est pour nous un grand pas. Hein. Je pense d'ailleurs pour Amazon aussi. On a signé un contrat de droit français. On est la première entreprise publique, je pense, française à faire ça. Un contrat de droit français sans engagement de volume. Et en fait, ça va nous permettre non seulement de renouveler notre socle numérique, mais ça va aussi nous permettre d'acquérir un certain nombre de connaissances, hein, puisque en fait, Amazon est engagé à nos côtés très fortement dans toutes ces histoires de change management et de nous accompagner sur comment nos agents, parce qu'en fait, c'est une transformation qu'on va faire uniquement avec nos agents, comment nos agents vont acquérir ces nouvelles compétences pour opérer du cloud. Quelques chiffres, et c'est là où l'histoire commence. On se donne à peu près 2 ans et demi pour migrer l'ensemble de notre parc applicatif vers notre nouveau socle numérique. Je vous l'ai dit, 60% dans le cloud public avec une approche cloud first. Je vous dis 1425 applications, 1425, 1423, c'est à peu près l'ordre de grandeur. On a 14 800 serveurs, on a encore 700 salles régionales qu'on veut supprimer. Voilà, c'est juste une histoire qui commence. Et ben, en 2020, j'espère être là pour vous dire que ça s'est bien passé. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. It's a great story. So with 125 different services and so many different categories in which these services belong, it is impossible in this keynote to sort of cover everything. So we decided just to pick a few things around data, data analytics, some compute at the end, some architecture things, but we're not able to cover everything. I do want to talk about a few of the things I think that are important at the moment, or that are really hot, and that I think everybody should know about. So one of those is the world of machine learning. If you've been following the news, probably machine learning and AI is something that is on top of everybody's minds. If you look at even if you get to the point that you look at the financial reports of the last quarter, I think something like 65% of the CEOs and CFOs mention machine learning and artificial intelligence in their quarterly reports. This kind of gives an indication about where the world is moving, really making use of algorithmic techniques to analyze your data. Now, even though there's a lot of attention to it at the moment, this is something that we've been doing for a long time already. If you've been an Amazon retail customer, then you've been exposed to machine learning for the past 25 years. Whether that is recommendations or similarities or bestsellers, all these things are driven by machine learning. If you think about machine learning, is not something that is sort of far out. It's actually just computer science. So if I think about analytics, I think always about sort of 3 different pillars. One is the pillar of analytics that is looking towards the past. The traditional reporting, data warehousing, that kind of analytics. And then the second pillar is that of now, of real time, where you're interested in what's my inventory level right now? What are my customers saying on Twitter right now? Not what they're saying yesterday, what are they saying now? And then the third pillar is to look towards the future, predictions. Now, we are really, really bad at predicting things. So what's the next best thing is to take data from the past and use that to try and make predictions about the future. Now, that's what machine learning is. Basically, trying to take data from the past and make predictions about the future. Take, for example, in Amazon Retail, I told you, we've been doing this for the past 25 years already. A good example of that is that we literally sit at Amazon on billions and billions of orders from the past. We know exactly which of those orders were fraudulent and which were not. So you can make use of machine learning to build a model that when a new order comes in, you can give it a score with what the likelihood is that this order is fraudulent or not. And if you give it a score that it's likely to be fraudulent, you don't automatically reject it. You just give it to a human to go and investigate. So most of these mechanisms are there to support human operations. So recommendations probably is one of the most popular versions of machine learning that you've been exposed to for a long time. They're really important. Everyone these days has recommendations. If you look at Netflix, it's an interesting story. Netflix claims that 75% of the movies watched on Netflix are driven by recommendations. Basically, people that go sit in front of the TV in the evening and say, well, Netflix, what should I be watching? And if that's the case, then your recommendation algorithms better be really, really good. And so you see machine learning coming back everywhere. If you're using Pinterest, they're using it to automatically weed out spam, to automatically categorize imagery, and to actually figure out what kind of advertisement should go with what kind of imagery. If you were at reInvent, there was an interesting customer in my keynote there. They're a company called Heat. And if you know about the UFC, the Ultimate Fighter competition, where you have two fighters on stage, they are actually putting sensors in and around all of these fighters. So basically, you've got sensors in these boxing gloves where if you hit someone, you know exactly, because of the type of sensors, how hard that person has been hit. And even though the other fighter may pretend that he's not hurt, you still know exactly how hard that punch landed. And they've got cameras on the faces of the fighters, and even in this microsecond where he flinched, and you might not be able to see that really, but the cameras catch that, and then use sentiment analysis on these videos to figure out what is the state of the fighter. So with that, you get a whole augmented environment as a customer, as a watcher, as a participant, to see exactly what is going on stage. And another interesting company is Hudl. They support coaches of all sorts of sports teams around the world by doing automatic analysis on their sports videos. So if you're an amateur football club in the outskirts of Paris and you played your competition on Saturday morning at 5 a.m., you can upload that video into Hudl, and they will do automatic analysis to give you advice about how to improve your gameplay. All of that is machine learning. Now, at Amazon the Retailer, we've been doing this for a very long time, and much of it has driven a lot of innovation at Amazon. And even the new ones when it comes to drones or Alexa, the voice assistant, or the Amazon Go store, the checkout-less store, all of these innovations are driven by machine learning. What we saw, however, is that it has so much different impact in each and every one of these areas that it became increasingly important at Amazon. And whether that is sort of vendor lead time prediction or price setting or what kind of packaging to use, all of these things are data-driven based on machine learning. But there was a big challenge there because most of machine learning is really the domain of data scientists. And we don't have enough of these data scientists to go about. And so we really wanted to improve the effectiveness of our engineers such that they could actually be doing machine learning techniques. Instead of that, we had to use data scientists for it. So we built a set of services around this to really elevate the level needed to actually be able to do machine learning. And with these new services, we saw a complete explosion of the use of machine learning within Amazon. And whether that is indeed counterfeit good detection or abusive review detection, all these things are machine learning driven. And we literally have also, on AWS, literally tens of thousands of customers already running using machine learning. So here in France, Aramis Auto is a 400 million euro online car sales platform that sells a car every 5 minutes here in France. It stores about 300 terabytes of data in a data lake, and they use machine learning to sort of assess customers' purchasing behavior and estimate car pricing. It took them 5 days only to use our services and integrate machine learning into all of their practices. Conversion improved by 20% immediately. So with all of these customers on AWS, as well as all the experiences that we have in Amazon Retail, what have we learned? Well, we learned one thing, is that the old way of doing machine learning is way too laborious. You really need a new stack. We need to make sure that every developer is able to build machine learning applications. And so if you look at machine learning, in essence it comes down to, you have data, you run a set of algorithms on it, and it creates a model. Yeah, and these algorithms, you can fine-tune them with all sorts of parameters. And in essence, machine learning is a pretty brute force technique. Yeah, you repeatedly run the algorithm until you get an accuracy that you're happy with. And then when new data arrives, you put it through the model, and it arrives with a prediction. Just like I mentioned earlier, if this would be a fraud model, you would give it a score about what the likelihood is that this new order is a fraudulent order. So at AWS, we've made it our mission now to actually make sure that we can put machine learning in the hands of every developer and every data scientist, where you no longer need to be a really deep machine learning expert to be able to use machine learning in your applications. So that means that we need to make sure that all the frameworks work really well on AWS. We need to make sure that we have platforms on top of this that take away all the heavy lifting that normally data scientists do. And then we also need to have a set of applications and models that make it easy for everyone that doesn't even want to think about machine learning to integrate this into their application. So these pre-built models are really useful at that level. So if we look at each of these different pieces, let's start off with the domain of data scientists. So for them, we need to make sure that all the popular stacks and software platforms work really well on AWS. So I think recently, this week, I think or last week, we launched TensorFlow 1.7 and 1.8 as containers on our platform, and you can integrate this easily into each and every one of your applications. So whether you want to use MXNet, or whether you want to use TensorFlow, or whether you want to use Caffe, all of these platforms need to work really well on AWS. And that runs, of course, on top of our P3 instances, which gives you well over a petaflop of compute, and has massive parallel access to memory, which makes it extremely well suitable for doing deep learning applications. So this stack, these lower two pieces, are there for data scientists that really want to tweak their algorithms. But if you look at sort of where we spend all of our time in machine learning, is really getting all your data there, building sort of the algorithms, then sort of train the algorithms, train the data with repeated different parameters. And then when you have a model, you need to deploy and run it somewhere. And when you want to run batch requests against it or real-time requests, doesn't matter, you need to run it somewhere. You need to be able to auto-scale it and things like that. Now, all of this is, in my eyes, heavy lifting. None of this has to do with you building your application or you using your data. So 80%, I think, of machine learning has nothing to do with machine learning. There's heavy lifting around it. How to get data into the place, how to repeatedly sort of run the same algorithm, how to parameterize that, how to actually manage your notebooks, how to deploy it. All of this stuff is heavy lifting. So all of that comes back in SageMaker. SageMaker takes care of all of the heavy lifting that you have around machine learning. You still need to know what you're doing, but you don't build new algorithms here. You use algorithms. Yeah, so it's a whole set of pre-built algorithms into SageMaker that make it extremely suitable for very large data sets. I mentioned earlier the data set of all the orders at Amazon. If you get new orders in, you don't want to retrain the whole data set. You really want to just add that sort of information of the new orders into the existing model. And so these streaming algorithms that we use in SageMaker make it extremely suitable for these very large data set processing. Now, when you then come to training, it's all about using one click. Yeah, you set sort of the parameters that you're interested in, the different variables that you want to track, and with just one click of a button, you should be able to execute all of them until you reach an accuracy that you're very happy with. And then, when you have a model that actually has the accuracy that you like, then you should also be able to just use one click and deploy it, and let us auto-scale this for you. Complete serverless environment where you put your model into the cloud, we'll give you an endpoint, and you can run there both your batches or your online real-time processing against if that's what you want. Yeah, and whether you have imagery coming in, and you've a convoluted neural network to sort of detect objects in these images, or whether you want to do k-means clustering to do sort of sales predictions, or whether you use regression testing against fraud risk, all of these algorithms are just things that you can pick from the drop-down menu, and you run it on your particular data. All of that heavy lifting around it all sits in machine learning, and it all sits in SageMaker. So in essence, SageMaker takes care of all the heavy lifting, and you can just focus on what you want to achieve with machine learning instead of having to execute all the heavy lifting yourself. So, as I said, it's our goal to get this in the hands of every developer. That means that even if you're a PHP developer that wants to include some image recognition on your website, you should be able to use this. Probably you won't be using SageMaker. You won't be using those lower-level frameworks. You'll be using pre-built models. And we give you a whole set of pre-built models on AWS. Yeah, and whether that is image recognition, where you can actually do facial analysis or image search on a set of images that you provide yourself, or whether you want to do this with video, or whether you want to do this with speech and hearing. Yeah? So Amazon Lex has automatic speech recognition and natural language understanding, as Amazon Polly actually does text-to-speech. And we recently launched a new language, a new voice here. She's called Leah, and she actually speaks French, and she has a Parisian accent. Yeah? So that's the latest voice that we've added to Polly. Also, there's pre-built models for text processing, for example, when you want to translate automatically texting, or when you want to do so sentiment analysis or entity extraction on your text, then Amazon Comprehend is the right service to use. So with all of this, we give you a whole batch of, a whole stack of different technologies that are really suitable for what you want to do. If you're a data scientist, you use the lower-level frameworks. If you're a machine learning engineer, you use SageMaker. And if you're an application developer, you make use of the pre-built models that sit in the AWS machine learning application services. So if you're interested in this, definitely go and check out SageMaker, because I think that is the easiest way for you to get started if you want to start experimenting with machine learning. Check out the device that we've built. It's called DeepLens. That basically is a compute board with a camera, with a high-definition camera on it, with a whole bunch of pre-built video extraction models on there. It easily integrates with SageMaker. You can build new sort of your own applications using video processing with machine learning, and then use SageMaker to deploy it onto your DeepLens board. You can buy this on Amazon.com. And we also have the Amazon ML Machine Learning Solutions Lab. We have so many experts within Amazon.com that would like to work with our AWS customers in helping them figure out exactly how to use machine learning, that we can hook you up with experts within Amazon to get this done. For example, Ryanair, which is well, the leading European airline, they run several core workloads on AWS. But they make use of the machine learning lab to create an application that allows them to automatically detect surges in demand for certain flight segments, and then anticipate schedule changes that they have to make to sort of anticipate the surges that are going to happen. Now, with all of this, you know, if you're interested in this, go check out ml.aws, and you find all the information there that you can possibly want for running machine learning on AWS. Now, with all of this analysis of data, you still have to store the data somewhere. Yeah? And so there's data lakes, of course, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but we still make use of a lot of databases. Yeah? And so databases are still core in many of our applications. And quite a few of our customers who have been running databases on-premise have been moving these databases over into the cloud. But that's quite a bit of a challenge. So we built a service for them called the Database Migration Service, and we launched that 2 years ago. And since then, we've migrated well over 75,000 databases from on-premise into the cloud. And the migration service helps you there with schema conversion and things like that, and automatic real-time replication into the cloud, such that you don't have to take any application downtime, even though you're migrating your application into AWS. Many of our customers asked us, though, when they wanted to migrate their databases into the cloud, to not migrate into the same database that they had on-premise. Many of our customers are getting sick and tired of the licensing tricks being played by commercial database vendors to sort of really extort them to stay on-premise or to continue to use their technologies. Many of our customers asked us whether we couldn't give them a target in the cloud that was had the open source interfaces, but had enterprise-grade database storage behind it. So that became Amazon Aurora. Well over 5-6 years ago, we started building Aurora. It took us a number of years to really rip out the cores of both MySQL as well as Postgres and replace it with a modern cloud-based database backend. Remember that most database technology has actually been developed in the 90s. It's not that modern. Yeah, and all the features that have been added onto these commercial databases have all been added onto this very fragile sort of base that was built in the 90s. Amazon Aurora is a truly modern database that actually really exploits every possible cloud feature that you can imagine. It automatically replicates over 3 availability zones, stores 2 copies in each availability zone, such that you have always local access and can survive even the most complex failure scenarios. And it's the fastest growing service that we've ever built on AWS. It clearly indicates how much customers are sick and tired of the games that commercial database companies play and how they really want to exploit a cloud-native database. So, for example, here in France, there's a company called DataSync. They have a managed platform that helps them analyze their customers' online behavior. And each of those customers interact with DataSync client applications. A Lambda function then gets triggered, and it performs a complex real-time query against Aurora to compute the segments that the customers belong to. They have well over 3 billion of these objects in Aurora, and they process well over 300 million real-time segment computations a month. They clearly were able to move much faster by using Aurora. They claim that they have a 4x productivity improvement by using Aurora over, let's say, commercial databases. Now, with all of these customers on AWS, we get a lot of feedback. Certainly, if you're the fastest growing one. So there's a lot of features and functionality that have been added over it, even in the past six months. So one of the latest features that we've added is Aurora Backtrack. This actually allows you to roll back to any transaction in your recent history. And so while this is, of course, a really good technique to actually overcome sort of user errors and input errors into your system, one of the major application areas of this is actually in dev and test. Yeah, you execute a whole set of transactions, and then if you want to test the next ones, you just roll back to the previous database state and you execute it again. So Backtrack is really useful for that. A very important feature that we launched about 4 or 5 months ago is that of Aurora Multi-Master. Where previously Aurora would be using a single master, meaning that all the writes need to go through the master or the master at least needs to synchronize all of the writes. Now with multi-master, you're able to have, in each of the AZs that Aurora is running for you, you'll have a local master that you can write against. This is probably the only multi-master, multi-data center database available in the world. Yeah, even other multi-master systems like Oracle RAC will require you to put all the database servers in one room with a high-speed network connecting them and a shared disk system. Aurora really gives you multi-master over multiple data centers, multiple availability zones, and it's the only commercial database to do so. And there may be some databases out there that promise you to do, for example, wide area replication, but they only do that by butchering the SQL standard up front to actually sort of really restrict what you can and what you cannot do with the database. So Aurora is the first relational database service that really scales out over multiple data centers and gives you a full, transparent MySQL or Postgres database. Now, many of our customers in Aurora had very unpredictable workloads, and there's still this challenge then in that world that you actually have to scale this up and down. And so that is such a, in my eyes, a cloud-unfriendly way of going about, where you actually have to do the scaling yourself. So we introduced Aurora Serverless that automatically scales the database up and down, depending on load that we're seeing coming to the database. Yeah, you set the min and the max parameters on how much you want to scale, and Aurora takes care of this for you. Now, serverless is a really important part of our services world. Now, in many of the services that you know about, whether it's S3 or SQS or SNS, all these services are serverless because you don't have to worry about sort of the servers that they run on. You don't have to worry about multiple AZs or replicating over multiple AZs. Amazon takes care of that. Yeah, all the deep integration into our world, for you, it's only an interface on the outside. So probably in the database world, the best example of that is DynamoDB. Yeah, when we started building DynamoDB, we were thinking, for example, what should be the administration interface to this database? And if we looked at other MySQL, NoSQL databases, we saw that they had a whole set of variables that you really needed to tune, whether it was your buffer pools or your connection streams. All these kind of things was things that you really needed to tweak and tune for one reason only, to get predictable performance out of the database. So we took all of that configuration away and just gave you those two things that you want. You can say what kind of performance you want in terms of reads and writes out of your database, and in a true serverless fashion, DynamoDB will do this for you. Now, when we were asked to actually add backup and restore to DynamoDB, we didn't want you to give you a backup and restore interface where you have to do the backups. No, you just click one button and say, I want backups. And then, in a true serverless fashion, Amazon DynamoDB will do the backups for you, without that you have to ask anymore. And of course, you can restore as well if you want to. And so, with all of these data stores and all of the different choices available for you, we really hope that you can pick exactly that particular database that is really well suited for that application that you want to build. So I want to introduce to you now Lucie Brousson to stage, the VP of Product for Content Square, who will talk to you about using Redshift with advanced analytics to generate valuable insight. You want them?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Bonjour à tous, je suis ravie d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. J'ai rejoint l'aventure Content Square il y a 4 ans. Je vais vous raconter un petit peu ce qu'on fait. Vous pouvez le voir, c'est pas sans risque, cette aventure. Content Square est une Digital Experience Insight Platform. Je me suis dit à un moment que j'allais essayer de le traduire, et puis en fait, en français, ça rend pas si bien. Ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on met à disposition de nos clients une plateforme SaaS qui leur permet d'analyser le comportement de leurs clients sur leur site Internet. Et donc, vous pouvez voir là sur l'écran différents exemples des reporting qu'on met à leur disposition. Ça va de la heatmap au session replay en passant par quelque chose qui nous est très cher, qui sont les insights. On investit énormément dans la data visualisation parce que l'enjeu ici, c'est vraiment celui de la démocratisation de l'accès à la donnée. Quand on déploie la plateforme, on a deux objectifs. Le premier, c'est de permettre à nos clients de mettre leurs clients au centre de toutes leurs décisions. Le deuxième, c'est de les aider à mettre en place une organisation qui soit centrée sur la data et donc sur les besoins de leurs utilisateurs. Le deuxième défi, c'est l'exhaustivité de la connaissance client. Et nous, la connaissance client, en fait, ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on traduit les interactions des utilisateurs avec les interfaces digitales. Donc, on va collecter toutes les interactions, le scroll, le tap, le swipe, les messages textes sur l'ensemble des devices, que ce soit mobile, tablette, web, application mobile, chatbot et demain, objets connectés et réalité augmentée. Et partout dans le monde, puisqu'évidemment, nos clients vendent partout dans le monde. Et le succès de Content Square, il est vraiment basé sur une promesse hyper ambitieuse qui est centrée autour de la démocratisation de l'accès à la donnée, on en a parlé, l'exhaustivité de la collecte, mais non content de ces deux piliers, on s'est dit qu'on allait aussi rajouter la rétroactivité et la rapidité d'accès à la donnée. En fait, ce qu'on promet à nos clients, c'est de ne pas avoir à se soucier des questions qui vont se poser. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a aucun plan de tagage qui n'est mis en place au moment du déploiement de la solution. On collecte tout et ensuite, a posteriori, nos clients vont pouvoir recréer des indicateurs, calculer ces indicateurs, enfin c'est la plateforme qui calcule ces indicateurs à la volée pour ensuite les mettre à disposition en quelques secondes. Et ces caractéristiques produits introduisent énormément de complexité et de métiers dans notre architecture, mais c'est aussi ce qui est au cœur du succès de Content Square et notre barrière à l'entrée. Le succès de Content Square, vous le voyez ici avec les chiffres qui s'affichent derrière moi. En jaune, vous voyez la progression du nombre de clients au cours des années, avec d'abord un début uniquement en France, ensuite l'ouverture du bureau à Londres, puis l'ouverture des US et du reste de l'Europe avec un bureau à Munich. Ce que vous voyez en bleu, qui est peut-être encore plus impressionnant, c'est la croissance du nombre d'interactions que l'on collecte. Donc les chiffres que vous voyez là, ils sont en billions. Donc vous voyez, notre nombre de clients grandit très très rapidement, mais ce qui grandit encore plus rapidement, c'est les données qu'on collecte. Et c'est pour ça que ce succès aurait jamais été possible sans le partenariat avec Amazon. Et ce partenariat, on l'a mis en place dès les premiers jours d'existence de Content Square. Ce qui nous a apporté, c'est du focus. Du focus sur notre métier, du focus sur ce qui nous rend unique et vraiment la valeur qu'on crée pour nos clients, sans se soucier une seule seconde de l'administration de nos bases de données. En ayant un tiers de confiance à qui on peut faire une confiance aveugle. Le deuxième bénéfice, c'est celui de pouvoir scaler sans aucune perte d'efficacité. Et c'est-à-dire que chaque fois qu'on a eu besoin de grossir, on a pu le faire extrêmement rapidement, extrêmement facilement et sans perte de productivité. Et enfin, la flexibilité, puisque vous pouvez le voir sur l'architecture qui s'affiche derrière moi, on peut associer Amazon avec des technologies comme Kafka ou Elasticsearch. S3, chez nous, c'est vraiment le cœur du réacteur, la source de vérité. C'est-à-dire que toutes les datas, on les reconstitue systématiquement depuis S3. Et si on fait une confiance aveugle à S3, c'est pour la disponibilité du service et aussi parce qu'on a l'assurance qu'on ne perdra jamais de données par la duplication des données au sein du système. Le coût hyper compétitif du stockage de données dans S3 est évidemment aussi un énorme avantage. Ce que vous voyez en dessous de S3, EMR, c'est là que réside vraiment l'intelligence de Content Square, puisque c'est là qu'on va modéliser toutes les données pour qu'elles soient prêtes à être utilisées et du coup pouvoir faire ces calculs rétroactifs à la volée et servir les réponses à nos clients en quelques secondes. Donc S3, c'est un élément clé de notre architecture. Dans S3, il y a toutes les données et peut-être même un peu trop de données. Et c'est là, en fait, que la complémentarité d'S3 et de Redshift est extrêmement importante parce que ce que nous demandent nos clients, c'est de leur donner la bonne donnée au bon moment à la bonne personne. Et donc, on utilise Redshift comme un laboratoire d'exploration, comme un laboratoire d'innovation, et nos data analystes explorent la donnée au sein de Redshift. Et ça, c'est quelque chose qui a été critique dans notre développement, parce que c'est ce qui nous a permis d'inventer des indicateurs qu'aucun de nos concurrents n'ont. C'est ce qui nous a permis d'avoir les data visualisations que l'on a aujourd'hui, puisque en manipulant du SQL, ils sont capables de travailler sur des volumes de données énormes et sans se soucier finalement en quelque sorte des conséquences et des problèmes habituellement associés à ces volumes de données. Et donc, on peut itérer très rapidement et faire du test and learn. Et cette notion de rapidité, pour nous, elle est critique parce que dans un marché comme le nôtre, qui est en pleine expansion, c'est une véritable course-la-montre que vous faites. Et ce qui est important, c'est de rester toujours à two steps ahead de la compétition, de la concurrence, pardon, et d'être capable d'avancer comme ça très très vite et aussi avec des coûts toujours maîtrisés. Donc Redshift a vraiment, le S3, c'est le cœur du réacteur, et Redshift, un élément clé de l'innovation chez Content Square. Puis je vais vous laisser en vous parlant de ce qui nous obsède aujourd'hui, nos challenges, mais aussi notre vision. Notre premier challenge, c'est de, quelque part, se disrupter nous-mêmes en sortant de la data visualisation et en allant vers les insights, c'est-à-dire que l'idée, ce n'est plus de mettre à disposition des données, mais directement des recommandations et des idées d'action pour nos utilisateurs. Et donc là, on investit massivement sur l'intelligence artificielle et AWS est le partenaire idéal grâce à sa puissance de calcul et à son élasticité. Et puis, le deuxième enjeu pour nous, c'est l'activation en temps réel de ces insights au travers d'un outil de personnalisation ou d'une DMP ou d'un système de CRM. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Lucy. Great story about sort of the role that databases play in our organizations and how to extract value from them. Reality is, I think, for many of us that our data doesn't live in one place. There's not just one database, not even per application. These days, with custom-built databases, you will pick exactly that database that you need for that particular piece of your application. A certain part of your application may just be able to use either documents or key values. Other parts may be graphs, so you'll be using Neptune. And you may be able to just still use relational databases with Aurora as well. Many applications will use all of these databases in concert with each other. So what happens in our world of analytics is that these data sets live in all sorts of different places. And as such, if you need to do analytics, you need to be able to get that data to one particular place to do the analysis on there. However, some of our data sets are getting really large. We're really talking about petabytes to exabytes of data sets. And as such, you also need a great place to store these very large data sets. And I think S3 probably is the most popular choice for a data lake these days. You get all the security, the compliance, and the audit capabilities that you need from a data lake. But also gets all sorts of object-level controls like policies where you can actually move them off into archiving if they haven't been accessed for a number of weeks. And it has a whole set of different mechanisms to actually get data in there. Whether you want to do direct upload or whether you want to do accelerated uploads through points of presence in your own country, or whether you use Kinesis to get real-time data into it. There's all these different mechanisms to get the data there really where you want it to be. But if you think about analytics, you really need to be able to access all of these different data sources, not just S3. And you need to be able to import that data into your analytics engines in exactly the way that you want to do it. And that probably includes on-premise databases as well. So AWS Glue is really the spider that sits in the web that achieves all of this for you. It will discover different data sources. It will discover the different schemas for you. You can set up who is allowed to access which particular data. It will track data lineage for you. All of these different aspects of a proper data management system that you can expect in this modern world. And then that connects us to all the different analytics engines that there are. Whether it's Athena for ad hoc queries, EMR if you really want to build Hadoop/MapReduce style dedicated analytics engines, whether you want to use Redshift for more traditional data warehousing, or Redshift Spectrum if you actually really want to execute on, let's say, exabyte data sets that live in S3. Data movement is always very challenging in the world of analytics. And with Redshift Spectrum, what you do is you define an external table in the data catalog of AWS Glue, and you can immediately start running database queries on that data that lives in S3 without having to move those exabytes into Redshift itself. And of course, then there's Cloud Search and Elasticsearch, and Elasticsearch really popular with all the visualization toolkits like Kibana and others around it. And then QuickSight and Data Pipeline to build sort of end-user style analytics engines. So again, we have very fortunate that we have such a large set of customers that actually really helps us to fine-tune the analytics engines that we have and to really extend them in a way that you want us to operate on. For example, Redshift Spectrum, the ability to analyze exabyte data sets, is really a request that came from some of our largest analytics customers. Here in France, Teads is a company that helps publishers monetize their content by delivering campaigns through interactive video advertising. And each day they send 1 billion bits to partners in real-time auctions, generating about 100 billion events. That's 2 terabytes that are stored, transformed, and served through Redshift. And without AWS, Teads has told us many times that it would not be able to support their 50% year-over-year growth if it wasn't for having true cloud analytics to support their business. I'd like to invite on stage now Nicolas Rivard, the Chief Innovation Officer from Euronext, to tell us about how they were using a data lake on AWS and the different ways that they are using analytics to support their business.
Thank you, Werner. Bonjour à tous, je vais vous emmener aujourd'hui dans le chemin qu'a parcouru Euronext, une société vieille de plus de 400 ans, et qui l'a conduit à utiliser aujourd'hui AWS pour sa base de données, pour son data lake, et bientôt plus largement. Alors Euronext, vous connaissez peut-être, mais laissez-moi vous rappeler, c'est la réunion de la bourse d'Amsterdam, de Bruxelles, de Dublin, de Lisbonne et de Paris. C'est à peu près 1300 sociétés cotées, 3,7 billions d'euros de capitalisation boursière pour ces 1300 sociétés. C'est 6 régulateurs nationaux. Et puis si vous ne connaissez pas Euronext, vous connaissez probablement ces indices, le CAC 40, puisqu'on est en France, étant le plus connu. Alors si on plonge un peu dans la plateforme de transactions d'Euronext, parce que c'est notamment une grosse plateforme de transactions, il y a des millions de transactions par jour, des dizaines, des centaines de millions d'ordres d'achat et de vente. Pour donner un peu des ordres de grandeur, un ordre entre le moment où il rentre dans le data center et il est renvoyé au client avec un acquittement, c'est quelques dizaines de microsecondes. Cette plateforme, elle génère 1,5 milliard de messages par jour qui sont stockés dans notre base de données, dont la plus grande table fait à peu près 400 milliards d'enregistrements. Donc c'est une plateforme qui est relativement grosse, qui est très importante en termes d'intégrité. On n'a pas le droit de perdre un seul ordre, un seul message. C'est une plateforme qui doit être disponible en permanence et dont les volumes sont amenés à croître. Alors, il y a 2 ans, quand on a voulu beaucoup plus utiliser nos données et notamment appliquer l'intelligence artificielle, on s'est confronté à un certain nombre de challenges sur cette plateforme. Le premier challenge qu'on a rencontré, c'est un challenge de performance. il faut savoir qu'on faisait les traitements, ce qu'on appelle en post-marché, à la fin de la clôture de la bourse, et qu'en moyenne, ça prenait 6 heures. 6 heures avant qu'on puisse utiliser ces données, les envoyer aux clients, les envoyer à nos équipes métiers pour analyser les événements de la journée et préparer la journée suivante. Mais dans des journées un peu exceptionnelles, comme le 24 juin 2016, pour ceux qui se souviennent, le 24 juin 2016, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? C'est le lendemain du vote du Royaume-Uni pour le Brexit. Ça nous a pris 12 heures à traiter les données. Vous faites les maths, ça veut dire que les données sont disponibles, les rapports sont disponibles très tôt le matin. Ça devient très compliqué pour être prêt pour le jour suivant. Alors le 24 juin, c'était un vendredi, donc on a plutôt passé le week-end à faire ça, ça s'est plutôt bien passé, mais on savait qu'on allait avoir des problèmes dans les années à venir. Enfin, on avait une infrastructure qui était plutôt en fin de vie, dans un contexte où les régulateurs européens voulaient qu'on stocke de plus en plus de données et devenaient de plus en plus exigeants sur la qualité du stockage et l'intégrité. Et enfin, dernier point très important, on recrutait des data scientists et on mettait à l'époque 45 jours à leur fournir une console analytique. Alors vous imaginez bien, un data scientist patient, il va rester, un data scientist impatient, il ne va pas forcément rester. Alors qu'est-ce qu'on a fait? On a lancé début 2017 un projet de refonte de cette infrastructure et on a pris vraiment du temps pour analyser les différents scénarios et on a ajouté le scénario cloud comme étant un scénario possible pour nos infrastructures. Alors entre nous, ce n'était pas vraiment le scénario privilégié, compte tenu de l'histoire de cette entreprise, compte tenu de notre appétence au risque, et puis compte tenu aussi de notre connaissance de ces environnements. Alors on a fait une démarche assez analytique, assez factuelle. Chacun des responsables d'une thématique a dû analyser comment aller sur le cloud et quelles étaient les raisons pour y aller et ne pas y aller. Donc on a fait ça pour l'infrastructure, la cybersécurité, la compliance, la finance, etc., etc., et j'en passe. Et puis quand on s'est réunis à la fin de l'été 2017, on a réuni toutes les informations qu'on avait glanées, et on s'est rendu compte qu'on pourrait avoir nos données en zone euro, qu'on serait compliant avec GDPR, qu'on pourrait avoir une encryption de bout en bout qu'on pourrait nous-mêmes maîtriser, qu'on avait un coût total de possession qui serait inférieur aux autres scénarios envisagés, qu'on pourrait accéder à un catalogue de services et d'innovations qui ne serait pas accessible dans les autres scénarios, et puis qu'on n'était pas les seuls, qu'on n'était pas les premiers à se lancer dans cette démarche de migration, dans cette migration un peu massive de données, et qui nous permettrait donc de nous rassurer sur la faisabilité de ce projet. Et enfin, dernier élément peut-être, même si ce n'était pas initialement un objectif, on s'est rendu compte que ça allait nous aider à transformer notre informatique, à transformer la manière dont Euronext travaille ces données. Il ne peut pas y avoir de keynote AWS sans slide d'architecture, donc je vous en ai mis une là. Ce n'est pas le but de rentrer dans le détail, il faut retenir quelques éléments. La première, c'est que c'est une architecture hybride. On garde un certain nombre d'infrastructures dans le data center, en particulier la plateforme de transaction dont j'ai parlé tout à l'heure. On est encore sur des temps de latence et sur des technologies multicast qui ne sont pas disponibles sur le cloud. Mais on a assemblé un certain nombre de briques de Lego, on a connecté ces briques de Lego à notre environnement, et on a essayé d'utiliser au maximum les services managés par AWS. Ensuite, on a pu utiliser nos outils analytiques existants, ça nous a évité de reconstruire et de redévelopper toutes les analyses, et on a rajouté des nouveaux outils pour les data scientists. Alors qu'est-ce que ça a changé? Quand je vous ai présenté les enjeux tout à l'heure, vous vous en doutez, on a maintenant une console analytique qui est disponible en une journée pour les data scientists, avec les outils d'AWS, qui permet dès à présent de lancer des cas d'usage sur l'intelligence artificielle. Très rapidement, puisqu'il faut qu'on migre notre plateforme de trading, ce qui va arriver la semaine prochaine, on va passer à un analytique J+1 à un analytique quasiment temps réel. Et ça, pour nous, c'est absolument fondamental pour la compréhension du marché, la compréhension de la dynamique de nos clients et comment ils interagissent, à la fois pour les équipes métiers, mais aussi pour nos clients. Et enfin, la scalabilité, en prévision des lendemains d'élections, par exemple, ou de journées importantes, où on sait qu'il y a des événements extérieurs qui vont entraîner des forts volumes sur les marchés, on sera capable d'anticiper ça, et même en intraday. Alors pour Euronext, c'est la première étape. Cette première étape, elle n'est pas terminée, mais on lance déjà la deuxième. Alors, on ne va pas tout migrer sur le cloud, je vous l'ai déjà expliqué pour l'instant pourquoi on ne savait pas faire. Par contre, on prend une approche cloud first, c'est-à-dire que à chaque renouvellement d'application et pour chaque nouvelle application, on doit justifier pourquoi on ne peut pas aller sur le cloud. D'autre part, on veut utiliser au maximum les services managés, les services fournis par AWS. On va partir sur une infrastructure 100% as code, et cette migration, ce plan de migration, il est en cours d'élaboration, et on va démarrer d'ici la fin de l'année les premières migrations sur le cloud. Voilà ce que je voulais partager avec vous aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie beaucoup pour votre attention.
Thank you. So very fortunate with customers like Euronext, because their experiences on our platform help our other customers think about how they should be building. And so with well over 1 million businesses running on top of AWS, over the years, we gained a lot of experience about sort of what are best practices. What does it mean to be well architected on AWS? And for that, we created a whole collection of content in what's called the Well-Architected Framework. And the Well-Architected Framework has 5 different pillars. Yeah? Operational excellence, security and compliance, reliability, performance, and cost optimization. In each of those different areas, we give you advice about what is sort of the best strategies to go about if you want to build a highly reliable system. Or what are the 50 questions you should ask yourself about security and compliance with respect to your application. Now, each of these documents start off with, indeed, a whole set of questions that you should ask yourself. And of course, we give you answers for AWS, but in essence, many of these questions are things that you should ask yourself, regardless where you are running. And as such, this is becoming a real collection of work that really defines what it means to build modern, highly scalable, highly reliable, secure applications. And so it is geared around a number of principles. And I urge you to check out the documentation because it's a great read. I'll touch on a few things here. For example, that you should have what's called game days. Game days are days in which you try to break your applications or try to run through scenarios that are so extreme to see whether your application can actually survive them. I remember in the earlier days at Amazon, the retailer, we started experimenting with game days. Basically, we didn't have cloud yet. We were replicating our services over 3 different data centers. And we had this principle that we should be able to lose 1 complete data center, and none of our customers should notice anything. That's a really great story on paper, until you start actually thinking like, what if we take 1 data center down and see what happens? Well, it wasn't that pretty. Let's put it like that. Really, because there were many parts in that operation that were still manual, that needed humans. And that even though it operated well, it took us a long time to actually switch over to the other 2 data centers. And then a scenario came that we have never anticipated, namely, what happens when you need to bring that 3rd data center back online? How do you migrate back to it? How do you bring that data center back up to date? So without doing game days, you never really run through all the scenarios that you need to really test your applications for all sorts of application and system failures. One of the most important pillars, I think, in the well-architected framework is that around security and compliance. Yeah? It has all these different areas that it touches on and comes with a whole set of really best practices and strong advice about how to implement secure systems. Yeah, and it starts off with having a very strong identity foundation. And then really managing, let's say, according to what I would call least privileged access. Something that we do with our AWS engineers, especially those that need to do operations, all the time, is to take away privileges that they have until they can't do their job anymore. You really want to make sure that those who need to do operations only have access to those services and those features and those capabilities that they really need to do their job. Yeah, an S3 storage engineer operations has no need for access to any of the EC2 capabilities. So really being able to sort of reduce privileges gives you a really strong base in case you become compromised. I do think in the modern world of development, security is changing dramatically. I mean, if we look at the past 3, 4, 5 years, the number of data breaches have been staggering. And it doesn't seem to stop. And as such, I think the way they've been doing security in the past is outdated. Where developers develop for X number of months their features and services, and then the security team sweeps in, reviews 50,000 lines of code, and gives it their blessing. It is clear that that has been a strategy that is failing. And as such, I think we need to change this. With all of us engineers here in the room, or all of us technologists, we should all take responsibility for security. It's no longer the security team that actually is responsible for it. Each and every one of us is becoming responsible for security. We are all security engineers now. And especially when you go to a world of continuous integration and continuous deployment, that is a radical different world where the old security models no longer apply to. We really need to beef up our security story to make sure that we're protecting our customers and our business. At AWS, protecting our customers will be forever our #1 priority. It will be forever our #1 investment area. And we will shift resources from feature development and other things into security if we feel that that's necessary. It's really, really time for us to step up and all take responsibility for security to make sure that our future digital systems are protected in a way that they can be protected because of all the tools that we give you. And it's not just the tools and services, it's also the compliance frameworks, it is also the data protection agreements and the way that partners can help you there. But most importantly, I think, is that we need to take responsibility for security. All of us need to do that. And we've always said, yeah, but we need to move fast, and security is in the way. Well, believe me, if you don't take care of security, you will not have a business in the future. It doesn't matter how much you innovate, because you will lose your customers because you cannot protect them. So the pace of innovation needs to really meet the pace of protection. We need to be able to do security and protection in a way that really meets the modern way of development and operations. And you do that through automation. Yeah? And we give you all these tools to actually help you protect yourself, your business, and your customers. Use them. On one hand, AWS is responsible for operational security, meaning that we protect you on the network, we protect you from intrusions, we do all of this work for you, but we also give you the tools so that you actually can also help yourself. And many of these tools that you see here are crucial for you. Use Amazon Inspector. If you are subject to regulatory requirements and you do continuous integration and continuous deployment, you need to make sure that every new deployment still is, let's say, PCI compliant. Use Inspector to continuously inspect your environment, whether you still are, or whether you maybe introduce new vulnerabilities. So let me pick on a few of these that I really think you should enable right now if you're not doing it. Yeah? CloudTrail is our auditing environment. It basically logs every operation on every object, on every API, so that you can have complete track of what actually happened into your systems. You can then move that into S3, you can put in alarms on CloudWatch there. All this data gets encrypted, such that only you are the one that has access to it. Make use of this. This is a very powerful tool to keep exactly track of what's happening into your systems. At a more global level, make use of config rules that can really track your environments and really take snapshots of your environments and see how this has changed over time. You can really set alarms on there in a streaming manner to make sure that you understand exactly when changes are happening that you like or that you don't like. In all of this, encryption plays an increasingly important role. Encryption is the only tool we have to make sure that you're the only one who has access to your data and nobody else. And we've been motivating all of our customers for years now to encrypt all of their data. There is no reason anymore not to do this. Yeah, remember that in, what was it, 5, 6 years ago, we still considered HTTPS too expensive. Now every consumer service runs over HTTPS. Nobody complains about that anymore. And maybe a number of years ago, we were still saying, yeah, but encryption is so hard to use. Well, that's of the past. Yeah? And whether you want to do this in transit, whether you want to do this in REST, whether you want to bring your own keys or have AWS generate the keys for you, and then set all sorts of access controls on who has access to these keys in there, there is no reason anymore for you not to encrypt your data. Yeah, Amazon, the retailer, needs to be PCI compliant. That means that about 15% of the calls, both in REST as well as in transit, need to be encrypted. We just made the decision to encrypt everything, 100%. That means that your engineers can no longer make a mistake about what needs to be encrypted and what not, and the PCI audit becomes really simple. There is no reason anymore for you not to encrypt your data, whether it's in transit or in REST, and using your own keys means that you're the only one who decides who has access to your data, and nobody else. And to make it easier for you, especially when it comes to in transit, we give you certificates for free. For free. No longer have to pay for certificates. Which basically means that we also manage the certificates for you. And if you've ever had to manage certificates, you know, it's one of the most challenging or stupid things that is out there. You know, I've had moments in the past where parts of the Amazon.com websites were unavailable because we had forgotten about the expiration date on a certificate. Well, that no longer happens. Yeah? We manage the automatic updates of these certificates for you. And next to certificates, of course, at application level, we all have secrets to keep. And whether those are AWS keys or database passwords or other parts of that are really unique to your application, but should remain secret. Until now, we've either hard-coded those into our applications or used configuration files and things like that. Both of them are extremely insecure approaches to actually managing your secrets. So recently, we launched AWS Secret Manager that allows you to manage your secrets in a central location, encrypted and only accessible for those who really truly have access to that, of course. But manage those secrets in a way that they no longer end up into your code. One of the things we do in Secret Manager is actually manage database passwords for you and automatically rotate those passwords. So if you use RDS or any of the other databases in AWS, we can automatically rotate those passwords for you. We've had a customer that was running 50 MySQL databases. And they actually really wanted to frequently sort of rotate their database passwords. But because of the complexity of that, they only did it every 6 months. Now they do it every 6 hours. Because they no longer need to take care of that. Secret Manager does this for you. So with all of these tools, all of these automation tools, it's up to you to start building secure applications. It is everyone's job today to really target, to really protect your customers. Now, here to talk about their digital transformation story and the way that well-architected principles help drive their change, we have Pierre Ollet, the VP of Sales and Marketing Information Systems from Renault.
Bonjour à tous, je suis très content d'être avec vous ce matin pour vous expliquer la transformation qu'on est en train de d'opérer chez Renault et puis notre utilisation de AWS. Alors, on va commencer par un petit quiz. Je voudrais que vous leviez la main, ceux qui utilisent au moins un des services qui sont listés derrière moi. Parfait. Vous pouvez baisser la main. Maintenant, je voudrais que vous leviez la main, ceux qui sont propriétaires de leur véhicule. Très bien. Et dernière question, laissez la main levée. Dernière question, c'est qui a acheté son véhicule d'occasion? Baissez la main. Voilà, merci, vous êtes parfait. En fait, à travers ces questions, vous comprenez le contexte qu'un constructeur automobile tel que Renault est en train d'appréhender. Il y a de plus en plus de gens qui utilisent des services de mobilité. De moins en moins de gens sont propriétaires de leur véhicule, et quand ils sont propriétaires de leur véhicule, ils vont plutôt aller les acheter via du réseau d'occasion ou via des sites d'occasion. Et donc ça vient perturber finalement le business model historique des constructeurs automobiles. Renault a décidé de lancer un programme de transformation en mettant à côté de son business model historique un business model autour du service et de la technologie, de mettre en avant la technologie. Alors quand on a un groupe comme Renault, il y a 3 éléments qui viennent, on va dire, définir la transformation qu'on a envie de faire. Le premier élément, 120 ans d'histoire. 120 ans d'histoire, on ne va pas appréhender la technologie de la même façon que les entreprises qui étaient citées sur le premier slide, qui sont quasiment nées avec la nouvelle technologie. Ensuite, il y a 5 marques chez Renault, et je ne compte pas celle de l'Alliance. 5 marques, ça veut dire qu'il faut trouver un équilibre juste entre qu'est-ce qu'on va communaliser, globaliser, puis qu'est-ce qu'on va laisser plutôt à la main des marques pour justement trouver cette identité. Le troisième point, c'est qu'on est sur un territoire mondial. Je crois qu'on est dans à peu près 70% des pays dans le monde. Et il y a des spécificités légales, de marché, des habitudes différentes. Et donc là aussi, il faut trouver le bon ajustement entre qu'est-ce qu'on impose et qu'est-ce qu'on laisse à la main des équipes locales. Donc c'est à partir de ces contraintes-là qu'on essaie de définir la stratégie de transformation de Renault. On a décidé de commencer par un périmètre, enfin un des premiers périmètres qu'on a lancé en transformation, c'est le scope digital, sales marketing after sales. Avec encore une fois une certaine complexité parce que dans le périmètre, on passe finalement des sites web, des applications mobiles grand public, à la gestion de notre réseau de vente, les postes vendeurs, mais aussi les outils de réparation des véhicules, de la documentation de réparation, de la gestion des pièces, de la gestion des magasins des pièces et de la logistique. Donc fonctionnellement, c'est hyper large comme périmètre. Et en plus de ça, je vous ai dit 120 ans d'existence. Renault a vu naître l'informatique. On a à peu près 660 applications sur le périmètre mondialement. Et on a, je pense, toutes les technologies depuis que l'informatique est née. Je pense qu'on a honnêtement à peu près toutes les technologies. Donc là, c'est pareil. Comment est-ce qu'on détermine finalement une stratégie de transformation qui fait qu'on ne va pas se retrouver avec une opposition, le legacy versus le digital, et qu'on arrive à embarquer tout le monde. On était un certain nombre à avoir déjà eu une expérience d'AWS par le passé. Je dirais que la grande différence par rapport à l'utilisation qu'on faisait d'AWS il y a 3-4 ans, c'est qu'à l'époque, on était quand même très concentré sur le management de l'infrastructure. On passait énormément de temps à manager l'infrastructure. Pour moi, la grosse différence avec la transformation qu'on est en train d'opérer côté Renault, c'est qu'on a vraiment basculé dans le platform as a service. Donc vous voyez, il y a l'ensemble des services qu'on utilise. Il y en a 3 que je veux mettre en évidence parce qu'elles caractérisent vraiment le nouvel usage du cloud public. Le premier, c'est ECS, avec la containerisation. Là, pour le coup, ça illustre bien le fait qu'on se détache de l'infrastructure. Deuxième, c'est Lambda. Lambda est venu, le serverless est venu, il nous a un petit peu challengé dans notre manière de designer nos architectures, de designer nos applicatifs. Troisième, j'ai cité RDS, mais plus généralement, les services managés, j'aurais pu vous parler d'Elastic. Je me rappelle, dans les transformations précédentes, on passait du temps à installer typiquement Elastic. Aujourd'hui, on ne se pose plus la question. On prend le service managé et ça libère finalement de la bande passante aux équipes pour se concentrer vraiment sur l'essentiel, la création de valeur et les features. Donc on a décidé de mettre en place ce socle de fonctionnement. On l'a mis à disposition de l'ensemble des équipes de développement dans le monde entier qui l'utilisent pour développer leurs features. C'est un peu une colonne vertébrale. L'IT et la technique, c'est une chose. Le mode de fonctionnement et le modèle, c'est aussi complémentaire dans la transformation. Donc nous, ce qu'on a décidé de faire, c'est qu'on a pris des équipes pluridisciplinaires. On a pris des gens du business, de l'IT, des devs, des ops, et on leur a dit, bon, écoute, vous avez en responsabilité un périmètre On peut l'appeler produit, feature, plateforme, mais en tout cas, c'est vous qui avez la responsabilité de ce périmètre, et vous allez être dans à la fois la construction de ce périmètre et l'opération. Donc, you build it, you run it. Donc ça a changé vraiment déjà la philosophie des équipes. Et après, très concrètement, la responsabilisation, elle se passe comment? Si vous arrivez chez Renault, on a donc des équipes qui sont colocalisées. On leur a mis à disposition des écrans de supervision. Et la plateforme fait partie de la vie de l'équipe. C'est-à-dire qu'on a mis du Datadog sur notre plateforme qui vient envoyer des informations à la fois business et à la fois IT. Parce que savoir si un périmètre fonctionne correctement en production, ce n'est pas juste regarder des indicateurs techniques ou des indicateurs métiers, c'est bien la jonction des deux qui permet de vérifier que tout va bien. Donc voilà, Datadog vient pousser des informations, on utilise Grafana pour restituer ces informations-là, encore une fois business et IT. Et puis on a même une plateforme qui parle à l'équipe, parce que donc, nous on utilise Slack pour discuter ensemble. Et puis la plateforme, quand il se passe des choses, en termes de temps de réponse, de mode d'indicateurs, elle vient aussi slacker directement dans le channel de l'équipe produit. Donc l'équipe est responsabilisée, a les moyens d'agir. D'ailleurs, elle agit en production sur les produits. Hein. On fait plusieurs mises en production par jour, alors qu'avant, on était plutôt sur des cycles un peu plus longs. Et surtout, la grosse différence, c'est que ce n'est plus les utilisateurs finaux qui nous appellent quand il y a un problème, mais on arrive à vachement bien anticiper finalement des situations en maintenance on va dire, préventive. Alors au départ, quand on a dit, quand on a expliqué aux gens par rapport à la transformation, c'est comme ça qu'on va fonctionner, on ne nous a pas cru sur parole. Donc on a décidé de mettre en production, le premier produit qu'on a mis en production, c'était un site web grand public qui fait de la cotation de véhicules d'occasion, et on l'a mis en production sur notre plus gros marché, qui est le marché français, où on a des millions de visites par mois. Et in fine, ça s'est très bien passé, à la fois techniquement, mais aussi au niveau du business. On a eu de la chance, ça a multiplié par je crois, 25 le nombre de contacts qu'on a eu, et par 15 la transformation en vente. Donc ça a eu un vrai impact business. Ce n'est pas lié à la plateforme, c'est la réussite du produit, mais ça nous a permis de prouver que tout ça fonctionne bien. Et ça a changé le mindset. Ça a changé le mindset et le regard qu'on peut avoir sur les équipes techniques. Ça a énormément revalorisé, en tout cas, les équipes IT. Les prochaines étapes pour nous, c'est d'étendre ce modèle-là. Bon, je vous ai dit, worldwide, donc on veut que toutes les équipes puissent s'appuyer sur ce backbone pour faire leur développement. On commence à avoir des use cases business très intéressants autour des applications mobiles, où on se dit, par exemple, il nous faut une base de données mondiale avec des contraintes de disponibilité, de temps de réponse. Voilà. Donc, comment on fait pour avoir une base de données qui couvre des territoires où, pour le coup, il n'y a pas forcément de data center? Ça, c'est des problématiques qui sont très intéressantes. Il y a le véhicule connecté qui vient aussi. Donc, vous avez vu sur le premier slide, l'Alliance a vendu 10 millions de véhicules en 2017. Ces véhicules-là commencent à envoyer des données quasi temps réel qu'il va falloir traiter, analyser pour aller créer de la valeur. Donc ça aussi, c'est des challenges techniques qui sont très importants, et on compte bien sur AWS pour nous accompagner par rapport à ça. Voilà, je voudrais remercier vraiment les équipes techniques de Renault, parce qu'elles sont sur ce sujet-là et elles font vraiment un super boulot, et je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have great customers like Renault to actually come and tell you about sort of their experiences with AWS, or how they're moving through a digital transformation phase. With all of this talk about data and machine learning and analytics and things like that, we shouldn't forget that we still need some place to run our own code somewhere. Yeah? And as such, we come into the same story again, making sure that you have exactly the right tools to be able to do what you want to do. And as such, in the world of compute, I think there's 3 different pillars that have evolved over time. It all started off with virtual machines, and there's still a powerhouse in all that happens on the cloud. But then modern development really has moved into the world of containers for a particular reason with respect to scalability and sort of total control over your resources. And then there's the new world of serverless, where you don't have to think about containers or virtual machines or anything anymore. The only thing you do is write business logic, and AWS scales this up and down for you. So let's take a look at each of these pillars. If you look at virtual machines, I think it's still, they're still the powerhouse because most existing software still runs in virtual machines. Yeah, if you're running an SAP ERP system, you're probably not going to run that in a container. Probably use a pretty beefed up VM environment for that. So what we see, even if you have homegrown software running in your VMs, what we see is that if you update it, it actually really happens through patching. And some of these VMs actually run months to years. I just had a sort of note from a customer about sort of 2-3 weeks ago that said he had a 10-year anniversary on his VM. Basically, has been running the same virtual machine for the past 10 years. And of course, so the VM has a per time unit cost basis with it. Yeah? You really have to pay for using the VM for all the time that you run it, regardless what you do inside of the VM. Now, to make sure, again, that you have exactly those kind of virtual machines available for you, we give you the broadest spectrum of compute instances. Yeah? And whether you want to have big data optimized or a general purpose like the M5s, or whether you want to really, only now and then you need compute and you want to use the T2 burstable ones, or you're on the other end, really high intensity graphics with the G3s, or whether you want to do deep learning with the P3 instances. Yeah? There's a whole collection of different instance types available for you. Crucial there is that you can make mistakes. Now, in the past, when you had to buy your own hardware, once you bought the hardware, you're stuck with it. However, here, you can start off with a particular instance type, and when you realize that actually your application was not CPU-bound at all, but I/O-bound, you move to a different type of instance with one click of a button. So it's really cheap to make mistakes. And as such, you can experiment with finding exactly the right instance type that works best for your particular application. There's an interesting story. So at the end of it, there's the F1s. These are FPGA arrays, basically where you can use hardware acceleration to really make sure that your very stable application moves really fast. And there's an interesting story here. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia actually loaded 1,000 pediatric genomes on 1,000 EC2 F1 instances, and actually was able to process those in 2 hours. That actually brought them into the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest processors for genome processing. So if you have applications that really fit into this model where they're really stable in terms of processing, try and look at whether hardware acceleration for the FPGA arrays isn't something that can really help you improve speed and at the same time drive your costs down. Now, what's happened over time is that most of those applications that were living in these VMs became pretty big, really big monoliths. And scaling them meant that you had to scale the whole application up. You had to instantiate, do auto-scaling, bring more of these VMs in play, and scale the whole application. Now, it turns out that in many parts of these applications, there are certain components that require this particular scaling, but there may be other components that didn't do that at all. An example I like to take out of the Amazon retail world is that at one moment we built something called the Customer Master Service. Basically, there's all code that operated on all of the customer data. And in that bigger service sat a login component, one of them, and another one was the address book component. Well, the login service gets hit on almost every page. The address book service only gets hit when you check out things. But it means that if you had to scale up this complete system, you would have to scale it at the scale required by the login component, which was massive. And it also means that if you scale that, you automatically also scale the address book with it, which is completely unnecessary. So decomposing your monolith or your larger system into smaller building blocks, where each of those building blocks has to have their unique scaling and reliability and security requirements, is important, because that allows you to be really efficient. Now, all of this move to what's called microservices has really been enabled by the rise of container technologies. They make it easy to develop these smaller components and then scale them up and down. I'd like to really emphasize one thing next to scaling and next to reliability, also security. In this first model that I gave, where it's a monolith, where both the login service and the address book service sits in the same system, basically, the address book service has access to the credential store. And the login service has access to the address book store, which is totally unnecessary. And it increases your attack vector dramatically. Decomposing this, not only with respect to reliability and scale, but also making sure that only those components have access to those stores that they need. And in a decomposed system, a microservices world, the address book service no longer has access to the credential store, only the login service has. So security is another reason for doing this decomposition into microservices. Well, containers, if you think about updating them, you probably have created these as immutable services. So instead of patching something, you basically develop V2 or V10 and launch those instead of the V9 that you're currently running in terms of updates. In terms of cost, this still runs over VMs. Yeah, these containers still map down onto virtual machines. So those are still the resources that you actually have to pay for. And so to be able to do this, we developed a platform. It's called ECS, the Elastic Container Service, that in my eyes is the absolute best way to run your containers on AWS. Yeah, it takes care of all these things, cluster management, orchestration, but most importantly, deep AWS integration. You can make use of IAM to set roles on the individual tasks that you have developed, making sure that they're totally secure in terms of access to resources. Yeah, the application load balancers is deeply integrated with this CloudWatch. You can get the logs of all these different components into one place. Really, deep integration makes it easy for our customers to develop scalable, reliable, and secure microservices. And many of our customers are already doing this. And so Radio France is a major group of radio here in France with more than 14 million listeners per day. The major part of their web and digital infrastructure is now running on Kubernetes, running on AWS, across several regions in France. Yeah? And it really allows them to scale up and down depending on the number of customers that are showing up for their system. And you already heard this, Kubernetes. Everybody next to having choice of ECS would like to run Kubernetes on AWS. And the challenge has been with those who run Kubernetes themselves is that it's actually sort of a pre-cloud world. You still have to map this onto multiple AZs. You have to take care of the reliability. You have to take care of security. You have to take care of reliability. All of this. Yeah, and as such, we decided to build EKS, the Elastic Kubernetes Service, for you, such that you can run managed Kubernetes clusters on top of AWS. Yeah, where we manage Kubernetes for you. A survey among the participants in the Cloud Native Compute Foundation showed that about 70% of them were running their Kubernetes clusters on AWS. So there's a good reason for us to make sure that Kubernetes is well supported on AWS. And we find deep integration, again, with AWS services. And we feed these things back into the open source community, and we're upstream and certified by the CNCF. But with all of this, there's still something sort of wrong in my eyes with all of these cluster systems. Namely that you still have to manage the VMs underneath there. And in essence, what you just want to do, you just want to build a container. You just want to build a task. You don't want to manage these virtual machines. It would be sort of in the early days of cloud where you wouldn't just want virtual machines, but you also had to manage the hardware. Well, that's not how we would like to do things in cloud. So we started working on removing the need for you to manage the clusters underneath there. So that became AWS Fargate, and it allows you to run and build and run containers without having to worry about the infrastructure underneath there, where we manage this for you. And Fargate is available for ECS at this moment, and it will be available later in the year for EKS as well. So with this, again, we give you choice. You can pick whether you want to run ECS or EKS as your container system, and then you can make decisions whether you want to manage the VM clusters yourself, or whether you let AWS do that for you with Fargate. So that was containers. Then the last piece is serverless. And really, if you think about everything that we've built in AWS, whether it's DynamoDB or SNS or SQS or Elasticsearch, all of these are serverless, meaning that you don't have to worry about servers. You don't know how many servers are being used there. You don't know where they run. You just know it's highly available and reliable and spread over multiple availability zones. And you can just make use of it. The one thing in the cloud world that is not like that is actually compute. Yeah, so with Amazon Lambda, we really wanted to get to the point where you only have to write your business logic. You can drop it in AWS. We take care of scaling for you, take care of multi-AZ operations for you as well. And so all of this brings together a complete serverless environment, just like you saw with the initial slides of iRobot, where no more servers are being used. You just use AWS Lambda and, for example, step functions to connect all of these different pieces together. Yeah, the advantages of that are, of course, that you no longer have to manage any servers. You can, the flexibility of scaling and availability is all taken care of for you. And most importantly, there's a radical different financial model that comes with it. You only pay for execution time, not for how long you've run a container or for how long you've run a VM. You only have to pay for the actual execution time of your functions. And so this has driven many companies to immediately start implementing serverless. And what I was surprised about is that often you see, let's say, younger businesses, technology-driven businesses, to be the ones that are picking up new technology. It turns out that many enterprises are actually really quickly jumping onto the bandwagon of serverless because it's such a good proposition that you no longer have to pay for idle capacity. And for example, here in France, Car and Boat Media is the French leader for car, motorcycle, and boat content. And they've migrated all of their websites into AWS in 2013 already. And they use Lambda to build, test, and deploy their search engine in 3 months. Yeah? There's well over 130,000 pictures and classifieds added every day. And they use Lambda to actually build a whole environment that actually scales automatically with the number of queries that are arriving. And they serve about 40 million classifieds a day. So again, I want to remind you of what I started off with, is that we provide you with the toolbox such that you can do exactly what you want. Build the way that you want to. You want to use VMs? The largest and broadest set of virtual machines available for you. You want to make use of containers? You can choose between ECS and EKS, and you can decide to run on Fargate or not. And AWS, as the pioneers in serverless, have the absolute best environment for you to build serverless applications. So with all of that, I want to remind you that there's a very active user group community here in France. Go look for their booth and consider joining them because you can learn a lot from your peers. I want to leave you with something I said earlier. Security is all of our responsibility. Us as technologists need to take this responsibility and make sure that we build from now on secure systems that make use of all the capabilities that we give you so that we can protect our customers and our business. And the second thing is, there is no reason anymore not to encrypt all of your data. At minimum, your personal identifiable information of your customers and your critical business data, but preferable everything. So with all of that, go build secure systems. Bye.
nous vivons dans un monde insensé et imprévisible. N'est-ce pas fascinant ? Vos ventes peuvent s'enflammer en une nuit. Une idée griffonnée sur une serviette de table peut changer le monde. Une maladie incurable peut trouver son traitement. Il y a tellement de découvertes, auparavant impossibles, qui sont réalisables aujourd'hui. Avec l'aide d'AWS et des technologies Intel, vous serez prêt à tout affronter. Prêt à décoder le génome humain. Prêt à guérir une maladie rare. Prêt à partir à la découverte d'une nouvelle planète. Prêt à apprendre une nouvelle langue. Tout cela grâce à AWS et aux technologies Intel. Car les ingénieurs d'AWS et d'Intel travaillent ensemble depuis plus de 10 ans déjà. Car vous avez les services AWS les plus innovants et les plus puissants à portée de main. C'est ça le pouvoir d'AWS et d'Intel. Alors allez-y, visez les étoiles. Investissez sur les projets qui fonctionnent. Rebondissez quand ils ne fonctionnent pas. Avec Amazon Web Services et Intel, vous pouvez braver l'inconnu. Vous êtes prêt à tout et prêt à tout changer.